Let's get into money, power, and politics, my favorite topics. On Election Day, voters sent a clear message about how they feel about the economy. They were enraged by a sense that things are not fair, from groceries to rent or insurance, the stress of the cost of living, and feelings that others are getting ahead. And they're listening to media stories about migrants getting hotel rooms and debit cards, but their son is still living at home. Feeling that lack of fairness drove so many voters to Trump. But now those voters and the rest of us are about to find out what Trump's policies would actually do. Here to discuss two of my all-time faves, Dan Nathan is here, co-founder of Risk Reversal, CNBC contributor and host of the On the Tape podcast, and David Gura, correspondent for Bloomberg and host of the Big Take podcast. Okay, what do you make of this issue of fairness? Rightly or wrongly, a lot of people felt like the economy is working for others and not for them. And there's this idea that Trump is going to fix that. So what happens now?
Well, I think be careful what you wish for, right? So if we heard a lot about the tariffs that Trump wants to put in place, I think that's one thing that a lot of voters just don't understand how they work. I know that you've been talking about it a whole heck of a lot for months and months. I think one of the problems the Biden administration had very bad surrogates on the economy. We've talked about that.
You and I have talked about this
again and again. And, you know, when you just think about it, we had unemployment at really 50-year lows or so. We had inflation coming down from 9% to 2.5% or so in the last 2 years. Interest rates started to come down. I mean, the economy was getting better, and they had they're handing off a very good economy right now. So if you think about, I get the fairness thing, okay? But at the end of the day, a lot of the policies that they've articulated, big tax cuts for corporations, tariffs and the like, it's really inflationary. So if we see inflation starting to go back up, then the Federal Reserve is going to have to start raising interest rates again. And we're going to be in the exact same situation we were, let's say, 2 years ago.
What do you think? We all know that tariffs play really well on a rally stage, make the other guys pay. But, like, now it's time for this thing to actually happen.
Yeah, and what you have to believe is that the whole school of economic theory and proven history goes out the window. And these tariff policies that Donald Trump's going to put in place are going to do something that everyone says they're not going to do. To Dan's point, we know they're going to be hugely inflationary. We also just don't know, beyond these big numbers, very few details about how they're actually going to work. But as Dan's saying, we have an economy now that's humming, doing great, relatively speaking. Yes, there are people who feel left out. There's a lot of opportunity here to really scuttle that.
Do you think he's actually going to do it? Do you think day one he's going to go full bore, tariffs across the board, appoint super right-wingers, you know, Peter Navarro? Or, I talked about it in the last segment, do you think there's this chance that Trump sees this opportunity, that he calls up a Jamie Dimon, a Larry Fink, and says, like, be with me, man. Be my Treasury Secretary.
Yeah. I don't think so. I mean, I think that's optimistic. But if you think about who's right at his side right now, it's Elon Musk. Elon Musk has said repeatedly that if we do not put trade barriers on Chinese electric vehicles, they're going to destroy everything. I think he used the word demolish the rest of the auto industry, you know, globally. So I think Elon will follow through on the sorts of things that are important to him. His worldview is probably a bit more nuanced than that of Trump's or anyone else that Trump puts around him. So I would suspect that they're going to actually, I mean, what was his thing? Promises made, promises kept. They're going to have to do a bunch of this stuff because, again, if he thinks he has a mandate, he's only going to piss off a whole host of people that he brought over towards, you know, his camp over the last, obviously, month or two.
Well, let's talk about this because Rachel Maddow has a new piece out in The New Yorker all about how authoritarians really work. And the way it really works is they're not interested in politics or policy. They're interested in enriching themselves, right? Corruption and enriching themselves. Many people have likened Trump's career or political career or aspirations to that of an authoritarian. So let's talk for a moment about his businesses and how well he could do. Because remember last time around, we're saying, oh, my gosh, this is crazy. Well, now the wheels are truly going to come off because no rules were ever put in place over the last 4 years.
So Rachel's written a great piece, which draws a lot from history, and it's well worth reading. But your question is a very good one. And I think back on 2017, there was that news conference. Donald Trump came out with his lawyer, talked about all the barriers that he'd put in place on conflicts of interest. I think this time that's all out the window.
It's not even going to pretend.
Not even going to come up. There's going to be no pretense that that's going to happen. So you look at his portfolio today, he's got these kind of strange digital cryptocurrency assets that we don't really know what they are, what the companies he's starting. He's got these NFTs that are out there. Then there's the old school real estate stuff. And Bloomberg had a big piece on that this week. And I think what's so fascinating is A lot of leases are up. He's going to be renegotiating, and sort of what he has now, talk about the art of the deal, is just fear on the other side of the table. I don't want to piss off the President of the United States. And so you can talk about his worth, his net worth, and all of that. He just comes now from a business perspective with so much more leverage than he had before, and I think it's quite clear he's going to exploit that going forward.
Yeah, I mean, retribution. I mean, he said he's going to do that. He's going to be a dictator for a day, and I think that's probably for months. And, you know, Elon Musk, and I hate to keep coming back to this, but I think the idea that he is going to be a shadow president is something that people should really start to think about. If you think about what Elon's stock just did, Tesla, it just gained $300 billion in market cap since last Wednesday.
So that $150 million he spent on the campaign, pennies.
It's just saying something about obviously the way forward here, how we're going to be governed, and the fact that you have someone like him who's going to be able to kind of press his thumb on the scales the way he did prior to the election with money, the way he used Twitter or X, you know, his own platform to kind of move around misinformation, disinformation. I just think, why would you suspect that's not going to happen, you know, for the next few years?
Well, Elon Musk, like Donald Trump, likes this idea of the administration having influence over the Federal Reserve. Like, that's all well and good because Donald Trump doesn't like, you know, separate but equal. But how is that going to play? Because when the bond market says basta, it doesn't matter who's the president.
It was clear at that press conference last week.
Jay Powell. No. Yes.
And, you know, before all of this, a lot was made that he's not an academic economist. He doesn't have a PhD. He is a lawyer. And it was clear at that press conference that he's going to fight this. If Donald Trump wants him to resign or tries to get rid of him, he's going to take any steps he can to prevent that from happening. But the sanctity of the independence of the Federal Reserve is so important. It has been the case for many decades, going back to the Nixon administration when that was kind of tested. Look, you talk about the bond market. There's Fed independence kind of in a vacuum, but beyond that, the ripple effects of jeopardizing that could be huge on the whole financial system. I think that Jay Powell recognizes that. I sense from what we saw in that tweet from Senator Mike Lee and what we saw from Elon Musk is that's going to be tested. I think that could get quite nasty.